I came rushing. I was teaching. And I heard you from I think so, yeah.
Have you met Sister Jenny? Jenny? And she's wonderful. Well, I better get some more water.
I know. I went and filled up yesterday, like so many times. Yeah, and Jim asked me last night. He thought, "Hey, I think you'd be great on there." But I thought, "Oh well, they'll have a lot of people. I'll just go and support." And then when I arrived, I had an idea that okay, oh, yeah.
I'm trying to remember. So glad to see you.
Hi, good morning. I have a little thief in my house. Butterscotch takes my glasses, and she takes them during the night.
She doesn't want you to
Some.
go to work. I
But
think
she,
that's
so I
butterscotch
found
is
these
her
in
dog.
my, she's
Hello, everyone. Good morning
these in my bag.
and welcome. We have reached the final day of our Ethel Lefrock Conference on Holocaust Education, and I'm so appreciative to all of you online as well as in person for your participation and thoughtful insights throughout this intensive week. Seton Hill University hosts this conference through our National Catholic Center for Holocaust Education every 3 years. And this year, the special focus has really been on education and narrative around genocide and the Holocaust. And so I've gotten so many new resources that I could use in the classroom, and I'm really excited about all that we have been learning. Today, as our last session, we felt like it was really important to offer an opportunity for some conversation regarding how we discuss challenging topics, controversial issues. And I think the current political landscape has made this increasingly challenging, not just in the classroom, but I think all of us can think in our day-to-day lives, perhaps around the Thanksgiving table even. Some of our conversations are just more charged and challenging. And I think the classroom is an accelerator of some of that, and our students are feeling that and seeing that. We as educators are seeing that and feeling it. If you are joining us from online, you will notice a QR code up on the screen. It will just give you access to a document that we're going to be working with today to generate some of our conversation. And if you're here in person, there are handouts. If you haven't received one, Dr. Paharic at the front can give you access to that. But we have an esteemed panel here who will be offering some perspectives on controversial issues in education today. And I actually just made an initial list of some topics that might be things that are coming up in your classrooms or in your conversations that I think are particularly challenging. And so I'm actually just going to give you a minute to look at that list, and then I'm going to ask if there are any others that you think we should add. I know there are many others. So I'll give you just a minute to take a look at that list, or if you are joining us from online, to use the QR code to access the document. So I thought we might start off first with our panelists by just asking them to introduce themselves and their role or where they are currently teaching, the students that they work with. And then also, if you wouldn't mind talking about if there may be one or two of these topics that either have come up in the classroom recently or that are ones that you would like to address, and it's something that you're thinking about a lot and kind of struggling with, just as kind of an initial entree into this conversation, who you are, where you teach, and which of these topics have come up recently or you would like to introduce and are struggling to think through how best to do that. So maybe we'll start at the far side. I'll start with you, Dr. Patete, if you don't mind.
Thank you. I thought sitting on this end would make me fourth. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, those of you online, as well as those of you here in person. My name is Timothy Petit. I am an associate professor of teaching at the University of California, Riverside. Yet I spent the majority of my career thus far teaching at a metropolitan university, the University of Central Oklahoma in Edmond, Oklahoma. It's a suburb of Oklahoma City. A majority of my work involved helping train pre-service English teachers, and so that's where my perspective comes from.
Fabulous. Okay. And I'll let everybody introduce themselves, and then we'll come back to the topic.
Sure.
Okay. So Heidi, go for it.
Good morning, everyone. I'm here in person and online. My name is Heidi Neubauer. I've been teaching mostly composition in English courses since 2008. I was teaching at a South Central College in Mankato, Minnesota, and also some courses at Minnesota State University, Mankato. And I also do some creative process classes at the Loft Literary Center in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So a lot of my work is really looking at voice and integrity and honoring the creative process and what we can create to make the world a better place, and also having a great interest in Holocaust and genocide studies and thinking about narrative and stereotypes.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and to our friends online. It's great to be here. My name's Kathy Harris. I'm our Dean for the School of Education and Applied Social Sciences. I'm also a professor for education. I teach undergraduate and graduate early childhood education classes and also special education classes. I work mostly with our pre-service students, also our student teachers that are going out into our beautiful schools for student teaching. And we engage in these sensitive topics in many, many of our early childhood and special education classes. For example, for teaching strategies pre-K to grade 2, art, music, and movement, parent and family conferencing, introduction to special education. I'm also a member and contributing editor for the Young Children's Journal for the National Association for the Education of Young Children. And this has been a very important topic, banning certain early childhood books in schools. That has been, even last week when I was in California, I had a chance to visit with LeVar Burton from Reading Rainbow, and he had a very interesting discussion on this. And I look forward to the next hour with my colleagues. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Christine Cusick. I'm a professor of English and director of the honors program here at Seton Hill University, and also coordinator of our partnership with the global organization Narrative 4. I teach a lot of first-year writing courses, literature courses, and as director of honors, I have the good fortune of working with students across the university and all of our schools in interdisciplinary seminars, most explicitly guiding a lot of independent research with honors students, which can cover a pretty wide range of topics. So I learn a lot from them and learn a lot about how disciplinary perspectives might shape how we talk about difficult topics, and also the necessity of interdisciplinary perspectives. So students are always teaching me a great deal about that. In terms of the list, I would say every one of these issues has surfaced in some way or another, so I look forward to learning from my colleagues and all of you.
And I realized I forgot to introduce myself. So I am Deborah Fazer McMahon. I am professor of Spanish here at Seton Hill University, and I'm also the director of faculty development, and have worked really closely with Dr. Paharic and the center, and also helped to facilitate our NEH seminar here on campus, where we worked with genocide and Holocaust studies, and with many of the K through 12 teachers who have participated this past week. So I wanted to start off actually thinking about just an example and a story that one of my colleagues on this panel told me about this past week related to the current political climate and the election. So Dr. Cusick and I were chatting a couple of days before the election about our conversations in classes. And she shared, you know, as we often do, wanting to allow our students to kind of talk about what's happening, you know, in current events in the country at the moment, and how they're approaching the important opportunity of voting in the election season. And I think the response of her students to that desire for an open dialogue was really telling for this moment. So I don't know, Dr. Cusick, would you be willing to share?
So in terms of this particular class, we do a lot of work in the beginning of the semester to create community norms around having difficult conversations, because that's part of the curriculum, part of the goal of a critical thinking establishing critical thinking skills and information fluency skills. In this particular occasion, it was fairly close to the election, and I was met with silence when I invited space for that, which wasn't, it wasn't just silence. They were telling me something through that. So then I just opened the conversation to ask if students, so what's going on? Would you like to? Would you not like to? And why or why not? Not wanting to force any conversation, but creating that space. And the consensus from the students who spoke was that they felt that they had established a community in the classroom and that they felt safe in that classroom through various activities that we had done, and they didn't want to risk violating that. And I just wanted to hear that, particularly students that were, for various identity factors, were marginalized within that classroom. They were particularly vocal, and I wanted to hear what they were saying and honor their desire to maintain that space. But for me, it was just telling that they had an instinct and sense that bringing those conversations into direct dialogue could put the community we had established at risk. And it felt to me that that community was more important than having those conversations in that moment. So that's what we did.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges for us as educators is realizing that incredible importance of developing community and a sense of safety, and also pushing our students to have challenging conversations and to be able to bump up against difference in ways that can be constructive. And probably the day before the election maybe wasn't that day, that probably was, I think your students probably wisely sensed that right at this moment, that might not be the time. But we do have, I think, an obligation to find those times and create those spaces. And so how do we best do that? So with that in mind, I have a few kind of prepared questions to get us started, and then I'll invite anyone from the audience who has additional questions for our panel. And I wish that those who are participating online could offer your questions as well, but unfortunately we don't have that interactive capacity. But I thought, kind of dovetailing off of what Dr. Cusick discussed as far as creating that sense of community and safety, I wonder for our panelists how you go about creating a safe and respectful environment for approaching controversial topics in your classroom. And then kind of as a follow-up to that, the second question, what strategies you might use to be able to remain neutral as a facilitator, or whether you think that should be the goal. Really, can we ever be neutral? Should we be neutral? What should be our goal as educators? So either one of those questions, I'll kind of throw it out to the group and let you respond.
You know what, I'm going to continue the conversation that Dr. Cusick came. Oh, sure, and I'll go a little bit better into the mic. There we go, I'll get closer. Community, that is so important, especially with young children. And also, I believe, with our college students. They're the Generation Z, so they're very, very immersed with technology. But having that community. So when I think of that for our children and for our teachers, I strive to tell them, think about development appropriate practice. When you think about development appropriate practices in the classroom, you take into consideration the child's chronological age, their abilities and strengths, needs, and capabilities, and also their culture. So when you are developing that community, the big ingredient is forming relationships with the heart for early childhood education, and even in our college classrooms. Because if Christine did not have that community, those conversations wouldn't be able to be immersed and be enriched. So other ways is that the teachers' interactions must be intentional. They must be authentic, with eye contact, with intentional listening. It is the combination of forming those relationships with the community and also having in the classroom environment ingredients that will include components for a social, cultural atmosphere in the classroom. either through affirmations, having the children or the students be involved with hands-on activities, having their voices on the wall with their responses, and also ideas that will capture creativity and imagination. That happens when students feel safe enough for those from the warm interactions from teachers and intentional that these conversations can occur.
I teach a lot online, so I feel the big message that I want to get to my students in an online class is that community is of utmost importance, because I feel a lot of students may feel disconnected, that they just have to go and get the homework done, and that's that. And so I really, that's my biggest goal in my online classes. So with discussions, I have guidelines set up that show this is how we're building community, kind of the ABCs of that, like acknowledge someone's post, build on that, connect with that. So they know that it's not just necessarily about getting a right answer to something, but it's about engaging with each other and learning from each other, because I feel then that they're able to talk more about topics instead of thinking they have to have a right answer or that they just need to get the homework done, and that they can engage and get to know their peers' perspectives as well, so they get a greater understanding of their sense of, I guess, their space in the world as well. And I feel in person, it's just about honoring what kinds of discussions we want to have as a class. Because I teach in the community college, I have such a diverse population of PSEO students, recent high school graduates, adult learners coming back that need to take maybe a general education requirement, which composition is, but there's a lot within that class that can build community. And when we're talking about rhetoric, we're talking about controversial things and talking about arguments. So I think just that building on that, the sense of community is really important.
Can you hear me okay? Okay. Teaching future teachers has always been interesting to me. And so as I was saying last night, I learned really early that I needed to equip them and help them, guide them by assigning works, by creating activities that they could model, and so I integrate works into my curriculum for, let's say, American literature since 1865, where Langston Hughes is a part of American literary history. They're not just a one-off. I also bring in their works that don't necessarily speak to a controversial issue. So they know that an author may represent a particular community, but they're speaking and they're writing about something that isn't embedded in something that will cause people to go into separate quarters. And I think that's helped me because accompanying images and actually having, I think, open-ended questions allows them to build community in a classroom. I also take note in informal assessment, so having a list of the students, ensuring that more people can talk. Again, my experience is specific to where I taught, so it's like I would have about 24 students in my class, so that could allow for discussion, but ensuring that I gave them time. And probably the biggest thing for building that community was allowing them time to process what I'm asking of them before I expect an answer. Because we know some students will want to speak out immediately, but what about the students who need a little bit more time to compose themselves? So having a writing activity that allows everyone to kind of prepare and consider their response has helped allow for more people to speak on what we're discussing in class.
I like that what you mentioned, wait time. All of us need to have patience and to give students wait time because for, like you mentioned, some students will come right up right with the answer, and others are taking and processing all of that in, and they do have thoughts, but they need just a couple, maybe a minute or so. And I also enjoy, and this is from a lot from Dr. Cusick, from all the experiences we've had with Narrative 4. I love bringing storytelling into our early childhood classrooms. And I did a small study on snack time with early childhood, and we found out that the snack time, when you'd have prompts, open-ended questions, okay, and that's going to be developmentally appropriate to whatever age you're teaching, to all of my teachers out there online. When you have snack time, think of a couple questions and listen to the children's stories, because they will share with you their cultures, their family traditions, their rituals, and then that helps all of us as teachers to think about, well, you know what, I need to have a picture book in my library about that certain topic. So I love that, having the storytelling, a little bit of wait time, and the intentionality.
And I think that intentionality is really important to just not only model for students, but to invite of students. So, you know, when we had that conversation and then students were pausing and asking us not to violate that community, I didn't just let it, we didn't just walk away. I said, well then, can we think about how we can use the skills of this course to create a world in which we're not afraid those conversations will violate our community? Can we think about how we can practice critical thinking and listening and thinking about the objectives of the course, so that that's not a reality, and reminding students that it didn't have to be that way, that we could have a world in which we can have conversations without feeling we're putting a community at risk. So I tried to invite them to think about the course in the context of making something better. But I mentioned the community norms that we established at the start of the semester, and I returned to those throughout the semester, asking if we think we should update them or revise them at all. And we also have a code word on the community norms that the students come up with, and it's typically something silly, like pineapple or Snickers or something. But so that when they feel those, when we're having conversations and those norms are being violated, they're invited to just say that word so that we can all pause, and sometimes we'll move into writing to think about what's happening in that conversation. So I think in reminding them of being intentional and helping them to think about community is not something that just happens, but that requires intentionality, requires humility, requires really hard work, is something that I've been trying to foster more, so that it's just not this assumption that because we're in the same space that community will just emerge. Even on a small campus, it has to be relational, it has to be, we have to work at it. And that it doesn't always mean that there's consensus or agreement. I think sometimes people get uncomfortable if we disagree, then we're violating community, and I think that's really harmful to have that message. And so I just try to work to bring students into that conversation, to recognize that that community can be messy and should be messy, but that we can also seek it with a common ground.
Thank you so much. Such thoughtful insights from all of you. I loved, Dr. Harris, your voices on the wall. Make sure, you know, including building that sense of community and having students' voices very visible and present. And Heidi, I think what you described about even for online teaching, which I also do a lot of, and I'm not sure for our K through 12 educators, probably not, but for the higher ed setting, I think more and more that sense of just how central that is for genuine learning and for real authentic dialogue, absolutely. And Dr. Petete, I love that idea of the wait time and the writing and using some of that, and also the notion that we can pick texts that can subvert and surprise without being ones that are going to immediately kind of divide our students into camps. I think that's a really valuable insight. And then Dr. Cusick, I love all the metacognitive opportunities that you give for your students and helping to set those foundations early. So super helpful. So I want to talk a little bit about the third question, because I think for our K through 12 educators, thinking about how to handle potential pushback from, in the K through 12 setting, especially from parents, perhaps more in the higher ed setting from administration, but I think we can also think about this even from students themselves in all of our levels of the classroom. I was thinking about one of our presenters yesterday talked about in her school district, in order to introduce a new text, there's this very lengthy process of forms and, you know, a 6-month wait period. And she said that, you know, once you've gone through that process, then the school district is quite supportive then if there are challenges or issues. But that also means, you know, it's a pretty heavy lift to add new text to your curriculum. And I was thinking about myself. I was a high school teacher for several years. High school English was my area. And I remember my very first year of teaching, I had used, it was an Ursula K. Le Guin text, and suddenly I had parent phone calls and students upset, and there was this whole explosion of things, and I was really unprepared to know how to respond to that. So I'm just curious from our panel what you might recommend, what you do when you face these issues, especially perhaps Dr. Harris, when you're working with pre-service teachers, yes, how you talk about this.
Okay, there are knowledge, skills, I'm going to say knowledge and skills, open ears, and again, forming the relationships. We do have to, I'm going to say, inform our teachers and give them as much knowledge and qualitative and quantitative research about these topics. And an excellent research that you can Google and find out several reports that are online is from First Book Research and Insights, all right? Another documentary that's excellent for teachers and families and administrators is called The Right to Read. This was recommended by, when I was at NACCE last week, and as I mentioned, we had, our keynote speaker was LeVar Barton with Reading Rainbow. One of the things he mentioned that we need to have energy of intention, because this was a question the CEO of NACCE did ask him about book bans, and he responded, every book is not going to be for everybody, but there is going to be books in the libraries that is going to touch one child, and that child it will make a difference for. So we have to have an understanding of that. He did also mention the documentary, The Right to Read, and it's a little over an hour, and it's excellent. And then also NACCE shared with us a colleague that came from First Book Research. They do quite a bit of quantitative and qualitative research about this. I'd just like to share some of the content and some of the findings. They say that just over 40% of educators indicated that they have had conversations with their students about book bans. 31% of educators reported that students initiated those conversations. Educators shared a range of student comments. Another important research key finding is that educators' responses to open-ended questions revealed that book bans and book ban conversations, they are impacting student reading in a variety of ways. That's huge. They said 78% indicated that students are reading more when banned books are available as an option. 72% of educators indicated that restricting access to books, how could you do that if you have this book in your library? 72% of educators indicated that restricting access to certain books can decrease. It's not going to increase, it's going to decrease students' engagement in reading. They mentioned 31% of educators indicated, like I said, they've had the challenges and the conversations. So how would you do that? I did a study with a graduate student who is from Seton Hill University, Maria Blasani. That was her thesis. And it was a very small research study, but she did a survey with data that she was able to code on 10 teachers in Westmoreland County on their classroom libraries. Only 3 out of the 10 had diversity or inclusion literacy in their libraries. In addition, when we're thinking about this, we have to think about teachers' biases. That's also going to impact the community in the classroom. What biases would a teacher have about maybe not having a book like this? The hardest part is going to be working with families and administrators, but I believe that sharing research and having educators come together, or we have discussions for our student teachers when they go out into student teaching through Capstone online discussions and during their boot camp, we can give them these websites, we can give them this research to talk about it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harris. Yeah. Anyone else want to jump in on that question?
I think for me, I've been very fortunate in working at a community college where there hasn't been a lot of pushback. Faculty talk. What I have found in my experience anyway is that talking to faculty about what I'm teaching and listening to what they're teaching and how it's impacting students is really helpful, because then there's that support already built when there might be pushback. And for me, students have watched Persepolis in my class. We've talked about Night, we've talked about The Diary of Anne Frank. I brought in stuff from Shirin Nesat, so some very controversial works in which I talk to students about why is this controversial, so they understand, so they are just able to get a sense of why that may be, but still, just feel okay with reading the material and wanting to understand it for themselves. So I think what you were saying too is just that sense that I feel a lot of maybe younger students may not want to, or just, thinking of banned books, like if it's banned, like it just feels like it's conflict. Mm-hmm. And a lot of students want to avoid that. Mm-hmm. So they don't want to go there. And I think just having those conversations all the time, I guess maybe not all the time, but frequently is helpful, so that conversation is out there and students just have a sense of what it is.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I think about called like the slippery slope, of something that we've taken off our shelves or taking out of our classes, and then how that gets extended to other works. And I'll draw back to the American Literature course that I teach. It's a 2000 level class, and I may have pushback from parents, even though, there's FERPA, or administrators and students. And I put in my syllabus now a subject matter notification. And I utilize that to discuss with them that if we're discussing American literature and the American literary tradition, we're going to come up across people discussing uncomfortable topics and difficult eras. And so for me, it's really challenging, because if I'm in the 19th century, and I've just listed a few, but there's a really good story by Rebecca Harding Davis called Marcia that's talking about a young woman trying to kind of transcend their realities, but there's language in it that would make students uncomfortable. The same with Zora Neale Hurston, a short story I teach of theirs. Philip Roth, Percival Everett, Leslie Marmon Silko, Louise Erdrich. There's either subject matter about characters and things that we're going through, trauma of war veterans, and self-care. And so I always try and talk about, before we read this story, about kind of like not prepping them, but notifying them. And that I'd like them to come talk with me before they read the work, so I can give them a little bit of context for why we're reading it and what they might encounter in this work. And it helps, but it doesn't always help because a student will be like, oh, it's okay, and then they'll go and then they'll encounter a word, and then they'll want to meet with me. And so I'm always aware of that in terms of what I assign, but I can't take Zora Neale Hurston out of the American literary tradition. Why would I want to take, Percival Everett? Percival Everett just was a finalist for the Booker Prize, and the book he wrote is James, and it is in conversation, he says, with Twain about Huckleberry Finn, and James is written from the perspective of Jim, and I think I would like to, assign both of those works, and yet we're being challenged to teach even, Twain. And so that's an interesting time in which to be an educator.
And I really appreciate what you said, Tim, about establishing a context for students. I think, and I'm very mindful that in a college classroom we have some freedoms that are maybe more difficult in a secondary level. But when I teach literature courses, trying to contextualize like the history of book banning, within a particular place and time, why books have been banned, so that I think just reminding all of us, including students, that this isn't a new phenomenon, and that there are certain social, cultural, political contexts that maybe give rise to these kinds of restrictions or this desire to restrict, can help students feel, I guess, more empowered. I think the agency is really important, so they recognize kind of what's happening and why it's happening, and that it's happened before. I think that can be really helpful for students. In terms of when I teach more contemporary essays or topics, and I think in the college classroom the resistance might be a bit more subtle in the sense that I'm finding more recently some students arrive at college kind of having been primed to look out for maybe what they have been told is an agenda of the academy or of an English professor. I have high school students telling me that they kind of look up their professors prior to getting into a classroom so that they can figure out their political affiliation, so that they can then determine what kind of agenda they're bringing to the curriculum. And that I find deeply sad. But in the college classroom, I have the opportunity to talk to students about that and to recognize, I think neutrality is important to maintain, in the sense, I just try to make clear that my goal is that they learn. That's my point here, and so I will do what I can to create an environment in which that can happen, but also recognizing that I'm a human being with with biases and vulnerabilities. So I think, again, in the college classroom, it's a little bit easier to do that, but bringing in pedagogies that allow students to see us as human beings and being honest about what our hopes and goals are for the class can kind of sometimes ease those conversations. But I do think the subtle kind of suspicion means that we have to work really hard to establish trust in a classroom. And I'm blessed because I teach smaller classes where we can do that more easily. But I think that trust is important at so many levels right now.
I think we go back to the trust and the safety. Also, educators need to have a good context with their parents by, sharing in newsletters the different forms of literacy they're going to be introducing into the classroom before you're introducing it. And also the educators need to read thoroughly the picture books they're going to be talking about, sharing that information and why it's important to their principal and to even the school board. But there are many ways to involve family engagement by, again, establishing the trust and community and embracing all the cultures in the classroom, and also making sure that every voice is, like we mentioned, of each child is noted, not only on the walls, but also in the picture books. So if a child goes up to the library and says, in the classroom library, where am I? Where are my traditions, my rituals, my family? It's not in here. We need educators to, and that's what we do very well, I believe, in our teacher preparation program at Seton Hill. We talk about different literatures. We talk about the sensitive topics. They're not only mentioned in our education classes, but also in liberal arts, which is so important.
Thank you. Such Great advice and helpful insights for all of us working in these fields. So I wanted just in our last few minutes to see if anyone in the audience had a question for our panel, or, you know, we've kind of covered the first 3 questions from this list, but if there were one of the other questions that you wanted panelists to address, I'll see if there might be someone in the audience who would like to join in. Or panelists, if there's a burning question that you would like to jump in with. All right, we have a question coming. Sister Gemma is coming with a question. I love it.
Oh, thank you.
Well, I thought that you might raise some issues that exist in our society today and give us some idea of how you're going to face them. For example, the president-to-be, Donald Trump, has said that on the very first day he's going to amass immigrants without documents and send them back to the border. Well, of course, much has to occur before anything like that could occur. But when these issues come up, or when I think we will have some very different kinds of policies being promoted, can you raise these issues in your classes, or do we have to be silent about them? I'm interested in what you think about that.
Last spring, when I was finishing my research paper unit with my students, and then I was going to go into a global context unit, there was a lot going on with the Gaza conflict, and that's when all the protests started to happen. So I stopped, and I started to hear things in class that were concerning to me. So I stopped everything that I was doing, and I said, we need to talk about this. And I said, what are you feeling? What are you hearing? What questions do you have about this? And they talked, you know, a lot of students that would never really speak up, and they're like, well, why is this happening? Why is that happening? And so I said, okay, you know, we had these conversations about the news, and I told them, you know, it's really important to understand that a story takes time to develop, and that not everything that you see on social media immediately is the case. I said it takes time to understand what is going on. And then I changed my curriculum a little bit, and I had students, we watched Watchers of the Sky, I think that's what it's called, the Raphael Lemkin documentary. Am I saying that right? I can't remember. But anyway, so, and then I brought in the United Nations, the Genocide Convention book that I had from my coursework here through the certificate program, and I said, here's, you know, the implications of why people can't just go in and arrest people, so because that was such a big question for them, because they're just asking, well, why can't this just stop? And I said, you know, it's a complex situation. And so then they wrote about that. They wrote about what they learned about it and how, you know, they can empathize with how it may be more difficult than they may have imagined, and just, it gave them a space in which they could get out their frustrations and have, you know, quality conversation without making a story out of it. That they took with them, they were able to, you know, break it down and have conversation in which they gained some wisdom from it. Even if they weren't really happy with the situation, they understood it better. And I think that's important to do, because they're very you know, students are very vulnerable to information, and a lot of times they just don't know how to quite bring it up in the communities that they may be living in, or they, you know, there's just not that access in other parts of their lives.
I know now that, you know, I worked and lived in Oklahoma, and I now live in California, and I teach at a minority-serving institution. It's not only a minority-serving institution, but it is a Hispanic-serving institution as well. And I think for me, at an institution, it also has a really, it's like number one or number two in terms of social mobility. I need to, what Shnupa Hanska Luger calls weaponized privilege. I need to be in a position to help and support. And I think that's what is most valuable about where I am in my life, is to make sure that I'm in a place and I'm visible and that I'm accessible and I'm empathetic. And not in the ways that maybe I'm trained, but in ways I need to learn. And I think that for some students it might be migration. Sometimes for others it may be about finances. For others it may be another political issue, and maybe mental health support that maybe is going to be impacted by the incoming administration and their policies. But I think being there in terms of not just giving a speech or saying it in a classroom, but investing my time and my labor into initiatives that can be of service.
And just to answer your question briefly, Sister Gemma, I think we have an obligation to bring those conversations into our spaces, and being really thoughtful about how we do that for all the reasons we've said. But I think, Timothy, you brought up a really good point, because for some of them, this is the only place that they will have to kind of critically examine those questions. And so we have an obligation in that way to allow them that space. And for me, as somebody who teaches in literature and stories, that has been the way to bring it, kind of make it more human to them, to make them see what a policy looks like in action and how it impacts, and placing that aside facts and data that shows the implications. But that takes time, and I think to develop curriculum that does that in a way that's thoughtful and intentional in this moment is going to require a lot of just physical time, emotional labor, and I think that's part of what we have to recognize, and I'm mindful that even intensifies even more for secondary teachers, like allowing them the space to do that in a way that's intentional and cares for the students and themselves as educators is something that I think we need to have a conversation about.
And also having conversations with our teacher pre-service students and our education students. We take a lot of time talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and children's literature is one of our foundations and springboards. For higher ed, a book that I'm starting to read that I find excellent is called A Pedagogy of Kindness. Okay, I'm sorry I don't have the authors, and I've just started reading it, but there's sections on self-care. Oh, I'm sorry.
Is that
Okay.
Kevin Gannon?
Okay. Self-care, how to put kindness into your syllabus, kindness into your assessments, and kindness with the classroom. And it's a very, very interesting read.
I loved, Dr. Patet, when you talked about being available and being a resource and a support, and sometimes not maybe in the ways that we were trained, but in ways that we need to learn. And I think that's such a valuable reminder for us that in these new times and challenging times, we have to be open to that learning and growth as educators and finding new ways that we can support and talk about these issues. And then when Dr. Cusick mentioned her work and the responsibility we have for these conversations, I was reminded just this morning, Dr. Cusick sent around to all of us in humanities a poem. It's actually the International Day of Kindness today. and it is a beautiful poem. I wish I could pull it up here, but I'd have to open up my whole email, and who knows where else that would lead. But it is this beautiful poem. I don't know if you remember the author. I can't remember. Naomi Shum. But it actually talks precisely about in order to have empathy or to be kind, we actually have to have experienced deep loss, and it uses all kinds of poetic language really of migration, of being a migrant and kind of moving through life and in those most difficult of crossings in our lives. Anyway, so hopefully maybe I can share that with Jim and we can share it with the group. I wish I could end with that poem right now, but I don't think I have easy access to it. So,
So that I don't look very altruistic, I woke up this morning and realized it was World Kindness Day, and I felt like the universe was telling me something, so reminding me of something, so something you work at.
Yes, so thank you so much to all of our panelists and all of our participants. I know we are just about at time, and I just wanted to offer one final opportunity if there were questions or any final comments from the panel. All right, and I know Jim, you wanted to, okay, let's give an applause and then.
Well, what a wonderful and appropriate way this was to end our conference by speaking about kindness. We could not have come with a better theme to end this conference that has been so remarkable in so many ways. We've had very high quality sessions throughout these three, now this is the fourth day, and including this one. I want to thank all the panelists for their thoughtful responses to the questions. And I do think that we who teach in this field are really challenged to make the connections between the world of the 1930s and 40s and the world of today. And I would say that whenever we see parallels, the demonization of immigrants, the use of propaganda to spur hate, and the telling of lies about people. These are teachable moments for us. This is an opportunity for us to address those issues and to make those linkages between what happened during World War II and what's unfolding today. So I think that, excuse me, we ended on a perfect note. And let me just remind everybody that all of our sessions have been recorded. Everything's available on our YouTube channel. So please share with your colleagues who maybe weren't able to participate in the conference. Share with them the video recordings of our programs. And let me also remind everyone that we're also going to be publishing a book that expands on the presentations we've had during the conference. So it will add in important ways to what we've heard. And that book will be coming out soon, and it'll be made available to everyone who registered for this conference. And I just want to remind people to keep an eye open for future events. We're already thinking about the spring semester and continuing the good work that we began here at the conference. So thank you all for being with us. Thanks to our panelists today. And we've raised questions that we'll continue to pursue over the course of this year and into the future. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So much being with you.
Bring us.
Oh, my God. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Deborah. Thank you.